Welcome to part 2 of What If Alejandro and Sierra Were an Island. If you've not seen the first part, I highly recommend that you go back and watch that before watching this because you're going to be very confused. And yeah, we're going to come back in. The girls on the left here plus Cody went on the reward and they would have bonded with the last challenge, with Katie, Lindsay, and Heather all bonding together as Cody, Bridget, and Lashana bonded together. Lashana is a lot more aloof slash distracted than she was in the original from the whole Alejandro situation of him flirting with her and sending her the things and, them kind of showing interest in each other. Katie gets a rundown of Heather's rules in the alliance since Heather wants Katie to join, but as Katie gets all the rules, she realizes that it's more of a Heather's cult than an alliance. But seeing Bridget bond with Lashana and Cody, Katie feels like she has to make other friends too to show Bridget she's doing fine without her. Not in like a make Bridget jealous, but just in a way of like showing Bridget that she can do things on her own and she's okay. The guys still have a lot of attention, mainly the Bass guys, Tyler, DJ, Jeff, because of the still Duncan rigged vote situation. Alejandro has worked even more of Harold, becoming friends with him, and even says in a confessional hearing the entirety of how Harold rigged the votes, that he's extremely impressed and sees this as a great opportunity to get rid of a big target. Because all they have to do is frame one of the Bass guys as the one who rigged the vote against Duncan, and then Harold can get away scot-free and someone strong is eliminated in his place. The girls arrive back to camp happy celebrating, though Chris officially announces the merge. Now, because of the original additions of Alejandro and Sierra, I don't think anybody would return here. Since the cast is already 12, adding 2 more would make a lot of things different and is kind of a bit far-fetched since production would definitely see 14 as too big of a merge cast. Also, Chris made a big thing this season saying at every elimination ceremony that the eliminated person can't ever come back, and he doesn't stay true to that obviously, but in the circumstances where it makes sense for him to stay true to what he said, then I think it would reinforce this decision to not bring anybody back. Now, the challenge is kind of boring. I'm not going to talk about the entire challenge play by play since so much of it is random that it would be impossible to determine everything. So instead I just talked broadly about how the cast would do in the challenge. First I'm going to talk about the new contestants that are here and how I think they would do. Cody doesn't seem to be the best with pain and is somewhat a clumsy guy, so I imagine he'd fail at some point, making it like halfway through everybody. Katie seems very bad with pain and even more clumsy, so I can probably view her being like the first one out because she wouldn't see a point of like trying to win. I don't think she has that sort of drive yet. And Tyler is also really clumsy and would certainly fail at a challenge that requires like precision, like what Trent did in the original of like hopping over stones. I imagine Tyler would fail at something similar to that. But I could see him making it to like the final 4 because of his pain tolerance, because he gets abused in the series, so I definitely could see him like staying for a while. Harold is kind of a wild card. I'm not exactly sure on him doing well or not. I don't think he's good enough to beat the winner of the challenge though, so maybe he's like final 2, final 6, or one of the first 5 out, but it doesn't really matter. I don't see him winning. And Alejandro is also kind of a wild card since he's very good at challenges, but this specific challenge requires him to take a lot of pain, which I don't know if he'd be good at. I don't think he'd be terrible. But the important thing to note here is that in World Tour during the first merge challenge, Alejandro froze the challenge since he doesn't want to be seen as a big threat so early. And I imagine that logic would still track here as well. So even if he does do good, I'd imagine he'd still throw the challenge to not get immunity so he wouldn't become a threat. And all the original contestants would do about the same. I mean, a few things to note is that now since Eva isn't here, she isn't here to cause the eliminations of Jeff and Bridget. But I don't really think Jeff or Bridget would win the challenge anyway. I don't think they're really the best at this sort of thing, and the person who does win this challenge proved very dominant, so I don't think they'd win anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And with that all out of the way, I can confidently say that Lashana, who won this challenge originally, would still win the challenge. She was part of the final 2 with Eva and herself in the original challenge, and even though she is still, somewhat aloof slash not fully focused on the game because of Alejandro, she is still the only real person I see in this challenge who's in a clear running to win. I mean, if Eva was still here and Lashana was aloof like she is now, then I could say that Eva would win, but because no one really has or could have an impressive showing like Lashana. Plus, the main reason Lashana won this invincibility is because it was also for a reward of trailer, which Lashana really wanted to win. So that could still cause her determined spirit to come out and get her to get back on focus, not thinking about Alejandro. So Lashana would still win invincibility, and after the challenge, Heather would meet up with Alejandro and remind him about the deal they had in the bunch of discussing this, that if the girls team won, then Alejandro would owe Heather. And Alejandro doesn't seem to mind at all since he did agree to the deal and ask her what she wants from him. Heather pauses before getting blushy and telling him that she wants him to stop flirting with Lashana. Alejandro insists that she's flirting with him before asking her why it matters. Heather gets even more red and just tells him that whatever's going on between them needs to stop. And Alejandro sees how upset Heather gets at this and also wants to follow through on the deal he made with her. So he tells her that he'll cut it off with Lashana, prompting Heather to pull him in for a hug before realizing what she does and runs off. Alejandro has a confessional being happy about Heather being so jealous, considering that looking at all the votes, Heather should be worried about going home, because Heather, Lindsay, Katie, and Alejandro would all obviously vote together, and within that, Alejandro could potentially pull over Harold, and if he used that favor that Tyler owes him for keeping quiet about him and Lindsay, then he could also pull Tyler over. Also, Tyler might just vote with him because Lindsay's on this side. But even with all that, it would still only be a tie. I don't think any of the other 6 would have a reason to flip and vote with this 6, because these people all really don't like Heather. However, Alejandro isn't too stressed about this, since his plan with Harold to frame one of the guys for rigging the votes against Duncan is still very much a go, and that could definitely save Harold, since people would want to get rid of, a cheater over just someone who's kind of unlikable. Alejandro finds Harold and mentions the plan to frame someone against him for rigging the votes against Duncan, and looking at the options of Tyler, DJ, and Jeff, I actually think Alejandro would lead instead with Bridget. Since Bridget's a really big threat compared to these 3 who aren't that big a deal, DJ is too nice to really do anything, Jeff isn't focused on the game at all, and Tyler is not a problem moving forward. Plus, he and Lindsay are somewhat working with Alejandro right now, so it wouldn't make sense for Alejandro to get him out. But Bridget is not only a really big social threat of how likable and nice she is, but she's also the easiest to frame the votes for, since she was already shown to not like Duncan, and could have been upset about the Sadie boot, so there's already kind of a story there that Alejandro could latch onto. But I don't think any of that matters, because originally Harold was shown in action and even at Play of the Losers to have a lot of regret for rigging the votes. So I don't think Harold would be okay with framing someone else for his dirty work, since now it's been 3 episodes later and the guild's starting to catch up to him a bit. So he tells Alejandro he's not okay with this and would rather just wait until it dies out. Alejandro is extremely annoyed at this, since this was his plan to save Heather and can't believe that Harold is messing up his plan. But before the vote, Alejandro goes to talk to Lashana, and he tells her partly the truth of what happened with the love letters. He tells her that he wasn't the one who wrote the love letters, and the only reason he went along with it is because he saw how happy it made her, and he wanted her to continue believing that somebody liked her. But he feels guilty and thinks she deserves to know the truth now and apologizes for going along with it, since it was a bad thing to do. Lashana does find his story a little fishy, but because Alejandro has played the social game so well and has genuinely just seemed like a really nice and charming guy, Lashana thinks that he's just a nice guy who wanted to make her feel good. And she's more distracted by the realization that the love letters weren't for her to actually focus that Alejandro's story is fishy. Lashana has a confessional, sighing while looking over the love letters, feeling like a fool, thinking maybe that she just read into it too much and maybe it really was written by Tyler for Lindsay, or maybe it was just accidentally found its way to her. But either way, she is sad and convinced they were never for her. And now comes the actual vote. Because Harold ruined Alejandro's plan of framing someone for sabotage, Alejandro doesn't view him as useful anymore and also wants to save Heather. So Alejandro stands in front of everyone before they go to vote and reveals that Harold was the one who sabotaged the votes against Duncan. All the Bass guys look towards Harold, and with all the pressure and guilt getting to Harold, he finally admits to it, prompting mostly everybody to vote him out as he apologizes to everyone. Tyler forgives him, and DJ is so nice that he even somewhat forgives him, but Jeff is still mad as he departs. As Harold leaves, he turns back around and confesses his love to Lashana and reveals that he was the one who wrote all those love letters for her. Lashana does the same thing as the original, running towards him and gives him a kiss, and I think this time her big reaction makes a bit more sense, since she was all worked up over this for the last couple episodes, as opposed to the original where she didn't really care until Harold revealed himself, so it's kind of weird that she just got really emotional out of nowhere. But now this is like something that's kind of been brewing for a while, so I think the reaction actually like makes more sense. In the next episode, Lashana will be talking in the girls' cabin with Bridget, explaining the whole situation with Alejandro and Harold and the love letters, and Bridget is shocked that Harold could write such romantic things, and Lashana agrees, saying that love makes people do crazy things while nudging Bridget. Lashana pushes Bridget to talk about Jeff. At this point, Bridget and Jeff both like each other, they just haven't done anything about it, and Bridget admits that she thinks he's really nice while blushing heavily. But because this conversation is happening in the girls' cabin, Katie overhears their conversation and seems extremely annoyed. For the challenge, 7 people who were here originally would get the same clue to the key, but the other 4 that weren't here originally, Tyler, Cody, Alejandro, and Katie, I had to decide who would get what clues, so I randomly spun for which clue they would get from the remaining clues of people who originally were here that had clues. And Tyler got the Ring of Fire, Alejandro got the snake protecting the key, which was originally Izzy's clue, Cody got the skunk hole, which was originally Gren's clue, and Katie got the bear, which was originally Owen's clue. Now, everyone else would go the same way about getting their keys, so there's not too much reason to talk about them. Alejandro would find the snake with his key, but this is actually an obstacle that would stump Alejandro, as there's not really much he could do. I mean, Izzy got the key in the original by getting bit by the snake and having it squeeze around her the entire episode, but obviously that isn't really a solution for basically anyone else. And Alejandro can't flirt with the snake since it's a snake. It isn't smart enough to understand those emotions, and in the original was just very much ready to attack. So Alejandro would try a bunch of different plans, but none would really work as he gets increasingly annoyed at getting bested by a snake. Katie, I imagine, would have no luck or even want to try and getting the key out the bear's neck, and considering that she's part of Heather's and Lindsay's alliance, Heather would run into Katie and make Katie help her to get her key in Chef's fridge to prove her loyalty to the alliance. And then after Heather gets her key, Katie asks Heather for her help, which Heather ignores. This would set Katie off and make her more annoyed than she already was earlier, as she grows a dislike towards Heather. Cody, I imagine, being clever enough to figure out Trent's solution of watering out the skunk hole, and even if he couldn't, Trent still would have finished getting his own key pretty quickly, and then he would have been able to go and help Cody with that plan either way. After Trent and Cody both finish getting their keys, they go to meet up with Lashana to help her because they were all pretty good friends at this point, and once they get there seeing Lashana fight crocodiles, they would just leave her since she seems to be doing fine on her own. Tyler's key seems pretty simple, since Duncan literally just jumped through the hoop of fire in the original to get the key, because Tyler's an all extreme, extreme sports, extreme stunts sort of guy. He would do the same thing of jumping through the hoop of fire, but accidentally catch his pants on fire, causing him to run into the ocean to extinguish himself. And as he's walking back to camp, Lindsay would notice him, and because she's not distracted with helping Heather because now Katie's doing that, Tyler and Lindsay would go sneak off to kiss in bushes. But because Heather did just finish getting her key of Katie's help, she would wander off trying to find Lindsay, and then catch her and Tyler in the act. But she doesn't say anything or confronts them since she's already tried telling Lindsay to not do this and that she has to stop flirting with Tyler for the alliance. And clearly Lindsay didn't listen, so now Heather's taking this into her own hands. Heather finds Alejandro, who's struggling with the snake, and tells him to come help her break up Tyler and Lindsay. Alejandro feigns shock at them still being together to not let Heather know that he was working with them, and Alejandro goes along with helping her, and in a confessional tries to defend himself, saying that he needs to go along with Heather's plan, otherwise Heather will know he was working behind her back. But at this point it's starting to seem like Alejandro keeps making excuses for why he can't turn on Heather when he keeps saying he's going to, but then these opportunities arise and he doesn't do it. Obviously none of that is said, but it is heavily implied at this point by the show since he keeps doing everything in his power to help her when he keeps also saying that he doesn't want to help her. So it's starting to seem like he can't really go through with it and he's just all bark no bite. And I figured that he acts like this pushover since in World Tour he definitely suffers strategically around Heather because he started to get a crush around her. The main rounds that I think of when I say that is like the China episode where he targeted Blanley over Heather because he thought that Blanley was, quote, making Heather angry, which to be clear is his justification for why Heather stopped him from cheating, which to me sounds like complete bullcrap. And then there was also the final 4 round where Alejandro voted with Heather just because Heather sang a song to him that made him think that they should go to the finale together, like as respect, I guess, like a respectful ending, which is definitely not Alejandro. I'm getting off track. The point is that Alejandro is clearly starting to suffer strategically because of sucking up to Heather, but for now all that matters is that he helps Heather. Now Heather does the same plan she did with Gwen and Trent to break him up, except now it's Lindsay and Tyler. She pretends to be sad to get Tyler to come comfort her on the dock, and then she makes up lies about how Lindsay is just pretending to like him so she can use him to get further in the game, and then she kisses Tyler in front of Lindsay. Lindsay runs off to the cabins and hides under the covers while Tyler runs to the beach and screams, hitting the ground upset. Heather goes to comfort Lindsay shortly after and tells her she's sorry for kissing Tyler and that she didn't want to, but she wanted to show Lindsay that Tyler doesn't care about her. This is a lot for Lindsay to process, but Heather pretends to act very nice, saying that she can take all the time she needs and Heather just wants her to be okay, which is obviously a lie. While Katie is storming off angry in the woods, she would eventually run into Bridget, who's busy getting her key from a rabbit. Bridget sees Katie and walks up to her to talk since they are good friends, but Katie immediately continues storming off mad while Bridget tries to stop her so they can talk. Eventually Katie turns around and tells Bridget that she doesn't want to talk to Bridget right now because Katie's mad at her. Bridget asks why, and Katie tells her that she can't believe Bridget is getting all googly eyes for Jeff when she was the one who told Katie to not get distracted by Justin. Katie calms down a bit and tells Bridget that she spent her last day of her boyfriend here dodging him instead of actually getting to do anything she wanted with him because she wanted to listen to Bridget, because she respected Bridget's word, and she just feels dumb for trying so hard to be a good friend to someone who didn't want to do the same for her. And then she walks off with Bridget staying behind feeling awful. Lashana would head back into the girls' cabin after getting her key and see Lindsay curled up in a ball underneath her cover. And once Lindsay tells her what happens, Lashana does the same thing as the original, going around telling everybody about what happened and that they have to vote off either Tyler or Heather. And because Heather still got the same key to the same chests, she would still win invincibility. So that would make the vote play out the same as the original, except now with Tyler getting the most votes for cheating on Lindsay. Lashana would call out Tyler for cheating when Tyler is confused why he got voted out, and this causes Tyler to try to defend himself, but nobody believes him as he gets eliminated. Because in the original, Gwen and Trent kind of fought a bit at the end, and that's what allowed them to like talk through why they were feeling the way they felt, and then they were able to figure out it was Heather that set them up. But because Lindsay is so upset and Lindsay feels really bad and she's like worth Heather, Lindsay doesn't really voice all these opinions and she's just like sad and just wants to see Tyler go. Next episode, Lindsay would still be upset about Tyler, and Heather would pretend to feel bad for her, well, Katie catches on to Heather's bossy nature. It isn't enough for Katie to assume that Heather staged the kiss, but once Heather leaves them alone, she still does tell Lindsay that it's weird that her supposed friend Heather kissed her boyfriend. Even if she was trying to prove he was a cheater, that's a weird thing to do, to kiss a guy that Lindsay obviously likes. Lindsay defends Heather because Heather is her only real friend, and feels like Heather is the only one who's really trying to help her. When it comes to the actual challenge, Lindsay was really bad at hiding this episode, and now that Katie is a part of the alliance, she would see Lindsay struggling and let Lindsay tag along with her. And later they would both find Heather going inside the mess hall, and Lindsay still wants to go hide with Heather like the original, and Katie agrees since she feels like Heather owes Katie for helping her last episode. They both go to see Heather, and like the original, she gets super aggressive telling them to leave, but Katie snaps with all her pent-up annoyance from the last couple episodes and tells off Heather, saying that she's tired of Heather treating Katie and Lindsay like servants and that her friends are supposed to equally help each other, but they are all just helping Heather while she does nothing in return. Heather is shocked by Katie's talking back and threatens to kick her out of the alliance, which Katie doesn't care about and says she'll gladly leave on her own, but all their fighting gets the attention of Chef, causing all three of them to get found and eliminated. Alejandro, who just lost an ally in Tyler last episode, realizes that he needs another ally, so I had to figure out who he tried to get on his side, since this challenge is perfect for getting an alliance, since it's really easy to go off and have one-on-one conversations with people. In looking at the options, I easily crossed off Bridget and Lashana as options. Bridget just isn't really someone that I could see getting along with Alejandro, plus I imagine that Bridget is actually a target for Alejandro because of how likable she is, so it wouldn't really make sense for him to partner with her. And he couldn't even flirt with Bridget to mess her up like he did in World Tour, since flirting as a strategy is mostly thrown out the window, so he doesn't want to upset Heather anymore. Lashana and Alejandro have a weird dynamic after the love letter situation, and again, I imagine that Lashana would be a target for Alejandro, so it wouldn't really make sense to go with her. DJ and Jeff aren't bad options for Alejandro, but I think he would lean more with Cody and Trent. All three of them are on the Gophers together, and even the last remaining male Gophers, so that's like an easy reason to justify making the alliance with them. And in general, Cody and Trent are a lot more game savvy than DJ and Jeff, which makes it easier to make his moves come off as strategy rather than him being diabolical and evil. That's kind of confusing. Basically what I mean is, like, I do think Alejandro could potentially convince Cody and Trent to vote off Lashana because Lashana is a big threat and they'd maybe be more receptive to that, as opposed to, like, there's no way he could convince Jeff and DJ to vote for Bridget because Jeff and DJ are both really about, like, being honorable and being nice, and they don't care about strategy that much. So, like, Cody and Trent make better alliance members. Alejandro would pull them aside into the cave that Duncan originally made the guys alliance in and tell Cody and Trent, as the last remaining Gopher guys, they should all work together to make it to the end. Cody and Trent are both confused why Alejandro wants to work with them, since it's obvious that Heather and Alejandro are working together a lot, and you know, they kind of have a crush on each other that they won't admit. Alejandro tells them that he does think Heather is a great gal, but she's also starting to work with others, so Alejandro feels like he should too. Trent and Cody both agree to the alliance, seeing it as only a net positive to work with him, and Alejandro thanks them. As Trent and Cody walk out of the cave, and once they are a fair distance away, Cody voices concern about Alejandro, saying that he doesn't get a good vibe from him, and that Cody has noticed that whenever something bad happens, Alejandro is always somehow connected. The diary, he was connected there. The love letters with Lashana, he was connected there. Like, he's the one who told Lindsay to go to the spot with the Tyler and Lindsay thing. So Cody's kind of like suspicious of him. From here, I think the rest of the challenge would play out the same. Bridget would get sprayed by the skunks and get caught, since she still went off by herself and didn't notice when the lights got caught around her ankle, which caused her to get sprayed by the skunks and then caused her to get caught by Chef. Jeff would get noticed in his hiding spot, which was up on a tree for some reason. DJ would hide on the roof of the cafeteria, but Heather would find him up there and turn him into Chef to get herself invincibility, because that was one of the ways you get invincibility in this challenge. Kind of dumb, doesn't matter. In this time, it would actually make sense why Heather tells Lindsay off for suggesting they both turn in one each to get invincibility, because originally it was Owen and DJ on the roof, and Heather tells Lindsay to go find her own, which made no sense because there was two of them, so each could have turned in one separately, and it really only existed just to let Heather be a bitch. But now, since it's only DJ and only one of them could turn him in to get invincibility, it actually makes sense. I don't know exactly where Cody, Trent, and Alejandro would hide, but either way I don't think it really matters because the last person hiding, Lashana, had a really good spot and was originally found last, and I still think she'd be found last. And as for the vote, I think it would pretty easily be Katie. Heather would be mad at Katie for turning against her in today's challenge, so Heather and Lindsay would already be voting Katie. Heather would talk with Alejandro to convince him to vote Katie, and Alejandro would agree with that since Katie not being compliant to Heather makes her not useful to keep around. And cause Alejandro made an alliance with Cody and Trent, he would get Cody and Trent to also vote Katie. And even though they have their suspicions about Alejandro, they would agree to voting out Katie because they don't really know her that well, but they do know that she was originally a part of the alliance with Heather and Lindsay. So they would view voting her out as a good move for themselves, because it's letting Alejandro think that they're on his good side, but it also weakens him as an alliance. And I could also see someone like Ashana who doesn't know Katie that well going along with this vote, so Katie definitely goes here because I just think this 5 is definitely not switching on this. and Lashana's definitely leaning, and I don't think these four would vote together. Maybe these three, but Katie's like separated herself from Bridget, so Katie would just probably like throw a swing vote at somebody, and I don't even know who really. Maybe like, I really don't know, Alejandro maybe? I'm not sure. Once Katie gets voted out, she walks her way to the boat of losers before giving out to Heather one more time. Bridget runs up to Katie as she's about to leave and tries to apologize, but before she can, Katie pulls her in for a hug halfway through her apology. Katie tells her that she can't stay mad at Bridget any longer, and for the last couple of days she was with a bad friend in Heather, and she realizes now that Bridget wasn't a bad friend to her. Sure, she wasn't always perfect, but it's not like Katie's been perfect to Bridget either. Katie says that she thinks losing her friends earlier just caught up with her, making her still easily emotional, and she put those feelings onto Bridget, which wasn't okay. Bridget thanks Katie while also lightly hugging Katie back, before telling Katie she should probably let go because Bridget still smells like skunk. Katie sniffs Bridget and instantly gags while letting go of the hug, which they both chuckle at, and Katie wishes Bridget good luck before she leaves. Even though Bridget and Katie were able to make up last night, Bridget thinks more about what Katie said and worries about her being right, and Bridget thinks maybe she's spending a little too much time with Jeff, so she talks with him today, telling him that she really likes him, but she thinks they should take a break while they are on the show so they don't get distracted. Jeff doesn't want to argue with her since he respects her wishes, but inside is really bummed out since Jeff doesn't really care about the game and he just wants to hang out with his girl. DJ helps Jeff through this, being his pillar to lean on during the challenge so he can function without getting too down, and in turn Jeff helps DJ with his fear of riding bikes. I have to quickly consider how the new people in this challenge would do at making bikes. Now, Lashana is in this challenge originally, but because Izzy isn't here, that means that Lashana would actually have to build a bike, and because she seemed like she had no clue what she was doing when it came to building a bike, I don't think she'd do very well. But given that someone like Gwen was able to make a functioning bike using the manual, I think Lashana would be able to make a functional bike. It just wouldn't be super good. It'd be like fine. It could work, it just wouldn't be like super well designed. Now, Chent's biography actually has a line about him enjoying work on motorcycles, so I imagine he'd be really good at this challenge. And since he's in good with Cody, he would also help Cody, and then Alejandro, being a part of the alliance, would also try to butt in to get his help. And Trent and Cody would share looks at each other, but Trent would agree to helping him since they're in an alliance. Alejandro senses the hesitancy from them, which lets him know that he's fully in the alliance yet, like in deep, but he doesn't question it right now since he still needs a bike made. I don't think Bridget would be very good when it comes to building bikes, and unlike Lashana, it is shown that she's very clumsy in the series, so I think her bike would also be a flop, similar to Jeff's, where it kind of just falls apart when someone actually rides it. The random assignment of bikes for this first challenge was really difficult to figure out, because I had to add 2 more bikes into the cycle, because originally Lashana and Izzy just ride off and don't compete in the challenge, which means there are originally only 7 competitors in the challenge, but now I need to add 2 more to the cycle, which kind of messes up the cycle because, okay, it's confusing to explain. It's kind of like, look at the order of this thing now. Like Trent, let's say Trent's riding Cody's bike, and then you go to Cody, and Cody's riding Alejandro's bike, Alejandro's riding Bridget's bike, and so it kind of moves like, you know, in a line to where if you started somewhere, it could like switch around, and then eventually it would start over as a cycle. Like, that's confusing. Okay, say like Trent goes to Heather, Heather goes to Cody, Cody goes to Lindsay, Lindsay goes to Alejandro, Alejandro goes to Jeff, Jeff goes to Bridget, Bridget goes to Lindsay, Lashana, Lashana goes to DJ, and then DJ goes all the way back to Trent. So you have an entire cycle of like, it all meets up perfectly in a circle, but now that I need to add 2 more in the cycle, it becomes a lot more confusing. So I decided that all the contestants who are still here and ride the bike of someone who is still here remain unchanged, which means Heather's still here riding DJ's bike, DJ is still here riding Jeff's bike, and Lindsay's still here riding Heather's bike. But from here, there's not much more I can really do to retain the order of the original. So for the rest of them, I randomly spun for everybody, and here's the rest. Trent rides Lindsay's bike, Alejandro rides Trent's bike, Bridget rides Alejandro's bike, Jeff rides Cody's bike, Lashana rides Bridget's bike, Cody rides Lashana's bike, and Jeff rides Cody's bike. There, so now I've ordered it so that person's in front of them to the left is the bike they're riding. Cody is riding Lashana's, who's just in front of him to the left, Lindsay's riding Heather's, who's just in front of him to the left, and DJ's riding Jeff's all the way back around. So this is the entire cycle of who's riding what bikes. And now for the actual riding part, I had to consider who would pass the finish line to make it to the next part of the challenge, which is what actually matters. Now, DJ would still crash on Jeff's bike because Jeff forgot the bolts and he still would, so DJ's bike would fall apart once he starts to ride it. And Jeff originally crashed into DJ's mess, so Jeff would also fail. And Heather had to push DJ's bike since he added a safety brake and she didn't know how to lift it, so she ended up crashing into them as well while pushing it because she wasn't looking forward, and that would still happen. Because Lashana is riding Bridget's bike and Bridget made her bike poorly, and I also don't imagine Lashana being like a careful rider, I imagine Lashana would crash with Bridget's bike breaking underneath her. Jeff would smile at the crash, thinking that him and Bridget are so alike because they both made terrible bikes, which prompts DJ to flick Jeff to get him back on track. And I think in general, like I mentioned before, Bridget is very clumsy, and even though she's trying to not let Jeff get to her, it's not really working, as she still misses him, and this causes her to crash as she's not fully focused and is just a clumsy person. And I think everyone else would be able to cross the finish line, which means that Alejandro crosses in Trent's bike, Lindsay crosses in Heather's bike, Cody crosses in Lashana's bike, and Trent passes in Lindsay's bike, meaning the people who compete in the next challenge are Trent, Heather, Lashana, and Lindsay. Alejandro would be annoyed and feel cheated since he crossed the finish line, and we talk about this with Cody, who also crossed the finish line but doesn't get to compete in the second part. Cody is starting to get tired of Alejandro and tells him everything about how he can't prove it, but he thinks Alejandro is involved in a lot of weird things happening here, and that he should be more scared of Cody than he is, because Cody knows a lot. Alejandro twists Cody's wrist while telling Cody that he's smarter than he thought, and he's right in that he was involved in everything. Alejandro's voice is cold and dead as he talks to Cody, telling him that he should really stay quiet, because who would believe him over Alejandro? And he's a little man in a big world, so he should stop trying to be the hero against bigger people. He already tried telling everyone about his clever little theory about Gwen being framed, but Alejandro is able to turn it around on someone else, and he doesn't doubt he can do it again. Alejandro lets go of Cody's wrist as Cody processes fully what Alejandro said and realizes that Justin was innocent. But before Cody can say anything, Alejandro gives him an offer, saying that maybe they should actually work together, since Alejandro is somewhat impressed by Cody, but more importantly, Cody would be really easy to be in the final challenge. So Alejandro would actually want to work with him now to get to the end. Cody hesitates, which makes Alejandro furrow his eyebrows, saying that this is less of an offer and more of a last chance to ensure that he stays in the game. Cody stares at Alejandro's hand and eventually shakes it, sealing their deal. Alejandro says that he feels good about his arrangement with Cody and isn't too worried about Cody flipping on him, but just in case, he wants to get rid of Cody's friend to make sure he's fully loyal to Alejandro. So just before the final race, Alejandro messes with Trent's bike, loosening the turn handlebar so that the bike can't turn anymore. Now, the race would actually still end up with very similar results though. Trent would crash in the landmine portion because he can't turn, so he ends up riding directly into a landmine. Lashana isn't the best at riding bikes, so she would fail at the oil slick portion since I don't think she'd be able to coordinate very well, and Heather still would have manipulated Lindsay in helping her win, meaning Lindsay comes in second, but because of the stupid ruling that Trent and Lashana didn't cross the finish line, Lindsay would be eliminated. Lindsay's outbursts against Heather would still happen, saying like she should feel bad that Lindsay's eliminated. Lindsay thought they were friends, but Heather's just acting really cold, and then she would still curse Heather out. And as Lindsay's eliminated, she would give everyone a goodbye, as everyone is really sad to see her go since she was really liked by the cast. Out of the 4 new people here, I think Alejandro wouldn't really be afraid of scary movies, thinking of them as pointless bloodbaths. He's not immune to fear or anything, but he just isn't really that afraid of those sort of things. Trent wouldn't be crazy about them, but he is somewhat into them since he thinks they're interesting, and he isn't super easily scared and is pretty numb when it comes to scary things, jumping into shark water, skydiving. And again, he's not immune, but is pretty fairly standard and does watch horror movies. Bridget wouldn't be super afraid of the movies, but she wouldn't like them because she isn't really a fan of violence and the sorts. She didn't like being a shooter in the Hunter challenge. And Cody normally would at least pretend to like them to seem cool, but because of what Alejandro said to him yesterday, he's really on edge and he gets scared pretty easily in this challenge because he's still worried about Alejandro's threat to him. Now, because neither Gwen or Duncan are here, the contestants wouldn't have a horror movie expert to help them out during the challenge. Not that that really matters because they all ignored Gwen originally, but this time they wouldn't know the rules they should follow. Heather would still go off on her own to do a beauty regimen, but Alejandro would follow her because even though he doesn't think it's real, he still thinks it's a challenge and that the Heather should take it more seriously because he doesn't want Heather to get eliminated. Which again, he justifies saying it's strategic to keep her around, but it's really starting to seem more and more that Alejandro just doesn't want Heather to leave. Trent would somewhat take over Gwen's role, leading the group about how to survive a horror movie. Because like I said, I could see him watching for fun. He isn't nearly as knowledgeable as Gwen or Duncan, but he still just like take them to sing and just says like don't go off on your own, which is the big rule. And like the original, DJ would go to pee and take Jeff with him to be lookout. And because Heather would still be doing her booty regimen, and that's exactly what scared DJ in the original enough to run all the way to production Chant, then that would still happen and DJ would get himself eliminated. Heather would still take the shower, causing Chef to come and first take Alejandro, which allows Heather to hear his screams, but she still doesn't have enough time to escape, so Alejandro and Heather also both get eliminated. Bridget would be worried by how long Jeff has been gone and says she's gonna go look for him, but Lashana pulls her back down in her seat and tells her that he's fine and she shouldn't go off on her own to go find him. Bridget unenthusiastically agrees while staring off into the woods, still worrying about where he is. Lashana would still go off to the mess hall to get food, and she would take Bridget because Bridget's been really insistent on like leaving the campfire to go check on Jeff, so she'd be able to convince Lashana to let her come with. And as Lashana goes in, she tells Bridget to stand guard outside, But once Lashana goes inside the mess hall, Bridget runs off into the woods to go find Jeff. And this allows Jeff to still enter the mess hall and capture Lashana. Bridget finds Jeff in the woods, and Jeff tries telling her about the ice cream truck he heard, because that's how Chris got Jeff away from DJ, and he just played the sound of an ice cream truck. Yeah. But Bridget just pulls him in for a hug, which gets him by surprise. She says she misses him a lot and is rethinking their lying low as a couple strategy because she just really wants to be around him more. Jeff shares the sentiment as he's missed her, but they both agree together to not be super out about them being a couple, because it still puts a target on their back. And as they lean in for a kiss, Chef finds them and captures both of them. Once they both get in the production tent, everyone who's eliminated looks at them as Chris reveals they all saw their sweet moment in the woods. You know, about how they want to make sure they stay as a couple, stayed a secret, and not known by everybody, like they all just saw. And both Bridget and Jeff feel embarrassed and bad that now it's all out in the open. Plus, Lashana and DJ are both mad at them for flaking on them when they each respectively sent one of them to be lookouts for them, and they both just flaked. While all that was happening, Trent was talking with Cody about why he's been all on edge today, and if scary movies really get to him that much. Cody says yeah, and that scary movies just aren't for him. Cody has a confessional immediately after that, saying that he's more afraid of Alejandro after yesterday, and he doesn't want to tell Trent because that puts Trent in danger, and he just doesn't know what to do. Trent says that Lashana has been gone for a while and he's going to go check on her and make sure she stays safe, saying he promises to be right back. Trent goes off and Cody encounters Chef because it's kind of like stereotype in scary movies that, you know, like scared person has to face killer alone, and because Trent just left Cody alone, that seems like a good like trope time for Chef to come in and get Cody. Because Cody is pretty good at running and is pretty small, he's able to run away from Chef for a while, but eventually gets cornered off. But as he's running away, he starts to imagine Chef as Alejandro, and with pent-up anger, he gives a knockout punch to Chef, similar to the one he gave to Duncan in World Tour. This knocks Chef to the ground and his mask falls off, as it revealed to be Chef to Cody, and Cody comes back to the production tent with the hockey mask in his hand as everyone celebrates with him, as they're all really impressed he was able to do that, except for Alejandro, who gives him a glare and a slow clap. And on the cameras, they see Trent in the mess hall talking with the real psycho killer, as Trent isn't that afraid of calling him an actor. And the same thing happens with the cast running to the mess hall to warn Trent, and then in fear, once Trent realizes it's a real killer, Trent punches him in the gut, causing him to get annoyed and leave. This seems really possible, since the real killer was kind of a wuss. He just left after a couple kicks, so it doesn't really seem like it takes a lot to make him leave, which is kind of ironic. I mean, that's the point, I guess. This would result in Trent getting invincibility, which is useless because it's an auto-elimination round. I don't even know why they said that. Whatever. And because DJ still ran off before even seeing Chef, he still gets himself eliminated for that. And like the original, he would still have a good farewell with everyone being at the dock of shame to say goodbye to him, because DJ was really liked. The animal assignment for this challenge is random, so as I do, I randomly assigned animals for people who weren't here in the original. Everyone who was here originally got the same animals, like Heather got the bear still, Lashana still got the frog, and Jeff still got the beaver. And for the random selections, Trent got a raccoon, Cody got a duck, Alejandro gets a chipmunk, and Bridget gets a deer. Cody would get the duck the same way Gwen does, using the duck bait to lead her to the cage, causing him to get the reward, because, you know, Cody's also a smart guy, so I think he could figure that out. And also Cody's pretty like nimble and fast, so he could also like run pretty fast with the duck bait. And Trent would have had the same fight with the raccoons that Duncan had, meaning he gets his animal shortly after Cody. I mean, I don't think I see Trent getting weapons like Duncan did, but it's not like Duncan actually used the chainsaw that he got, so, you know, I could see it being like about equal, with it playing out the same. And now that Cody has both punched the psycho killer and won this challenge, he feels a bit more confident about the whole Alejandro situation and takes this time to tell Trent about Alejandro and says they have to get rid of him tonight. Trent believes Cody since Cody's been a good friend. Also, Trent thought it was weird that his turns didn't work in the bike challenge, since he's really good at making bikes and he didn't see himself making that mistake, so it would explain like if Alejandro did it, that's why it happened. So it makes sense to Trent. Alejandro would struggle getting the chipmunk because it's small and hard to catch, and as he's struggling he gets more annoyed at not being able to get it and imagines what Jose will say about him getting bested by a tiny chipmunk. And I think Bridget would be doing fine since she's really nice and in touch with nature, so I think she'd be able to get the deer relatively quickly, like maybe the third one to get her animal. And the rest of the challenge would basically play out the same. Jeff and Lashana would still eventually get their animals, and I do think even though it's hard for Alejandro, I do think he could eventually get the chipmunk. And I don't think Heather could get a bear since it was just kind of designed bullshit. There's no way she was ever going to get a bear in the cage, and she didn't have that much luck in the original, so I don't think she'd have much luck here. So Heather would still lose the challenge and be forced to the punishment. Cody and Trent would talk after the challenge about what they should do for the vote, since they need to get more people to vote for Alejandro for him to actually go. But it's difficult since, again, I've said it a bunch, but Alejandro appeared to be really nice and really charming, so people wouldn't want to vote for him. But Cody remembers when Alejandro told him that he's a small man and figures that they should get the help of someone just as dirty and cruel as Alejandro to go against him. So they talk to Heather. Cody makes the plea to her that she has to vote him out now while she has the chance because he's a great challenge competitor that can win it out. Plus, she's seen firsthand how good he is at manipulating people. Heather agrees, and like World Tour where she turned against Alejandro at the Final Four, I think she shows that she is capable to turn against him. So she would agree, but Cody and Trent would still worry as they still need more votes. But Heather is confused how they haven't already got some more votes and just tells them to follow them and watch and learn. Heather heads over to Jeff and Bridget and convinces them to vote Alejandro since he's a big threat, and because tonight's target was Bridget because they're a power couple and they want one of them to go, so they should really listen to Heather's offer, otherwise it's one of them going. Because Bridget and Jeff have already been stressing out about being perceived as a power couple, they take Heather up on her offer, questioning her if she really means Alejandro since they assumed she had a crush on him, which makes Heather blush as she denies having any feelings for him. And in a 5-2 vote, Alejandro is eliminated. Alejandro is completely shocked and his jaw drops as he turns back to the cast where Cody is taunting him. Alejandro realizes that Cody must have somehow actually taken him out and is completely embarrassed that he got taken out by Cody, and he completely shuts down, just keeping his jaw dropped during the entirety of his elimination. Heather feels a bit bad but reassures herself that it was necessary to do, and just waves goodbye as he gets taken away on the boat. For this challenge, the duos made for this challenge are clearly made by production as groups of people that don't get along on the island. So with this knowledge, these are the duos I made. Heather and Lashana. This one's pretty self-explanatory. They've been in a rivalry basically all season, and they clearly don't get along, so they're a pretty given pair. Trent and Jeff. I figured that because Trent always plays songs, he kind of likes expressing different types of emotions, and he doesn't really like that Jeff is always in a good mood and doesn't feel anything else, since Trent feels like that's kind of bland. And then Cody and Bridget. Cody is a bit of a weirdo, lame flirting guy and is obviously not his main thing anymore as he's grown a lot as a person, but I figured that all the time the cast has spent together, Bridget has started to notice some of that, and she's just not a fan of that type of flirting, so she doesn't really have the highest perception of Cody. When it comes to the first challenge, one team member has to feed the other one, and I imagine that Lashana would eat for the Heather-Lashana duo, because for some reason in the original she wanted to eat, and I don't think Heather would fight her on that, so they'd agree on that. Jeff would be the eater for the Trent and Jeff duo, since he seemed to enjoy eating the food and also just didn't really care about the choice. He was fine with being the eater, he's fine with being the feeder because he's, real chillax. And Cody would volunteer for the Cody and Bridget duo since Bridget's a vegetarian, so she wouldn't be able to eat the meat, so she'd be a bad eater. Jeff and Trent wouldn't have a chance of winning this challenge since Jeff is way too focused on the taste instead of actually eating a lot. And I think Cody would get full pretty quick since he's a much smaller person. And he tries to insist on eating more, but Bridget would just stop feeding him after a bit, not wanting to overstuff him. And Lashana would be a pretty good eater in my mind, so the Lashana-Heather duo would take the first point because I also see Heather being a really aggressive feeder, which would get them a lot of food. The next challenge is the teams riding the canoes to Boney Island. Cody would insist on pulling the canoe out to the water like he originally did with Gwen a while back in Up the Creek. He'd kind of do the similar thing with Bridget since he never got really do it in that challenge, so I think it still happened here. Bridget tries to say she can do it, but Cody keeps insisting to Bridget's annoyance. There's nothing really else to talk about on the actual ride there, so once all the duos get to Boney Island, Chris explains the next part of the challenge of having to return part of Beth's idol back to a cave, and one member has to give the other one a piggyback there. Cody would try to offer to carry Bridget, but she would just lean like her upper torso on him to Cody's struggle to prove a point and just tell him to get on her back. Bridget has a confessional saying this is why she doesn't really like Cody because he's always acting like a little brother and sometimes it gets kind of annoying. Jeff and Trent don't really want to be seen being carried since they're both guys and that's kind of weird. But Jeff convinces Trent to let Jeff carry him since he wants to look good in front of Bridget, and Trent accepts that, not wanting to make a big deal about it. And Lashana would try to make Heather carry her, but this would cause a fight between them as Heather insists that there's no way she could carry Lashana, which, causes them to fight, just like how Lashana and Duncan do originally. Jeff still goes off to his spot, not focusing on the challenge, which annoys Trent because he wants him to focus. And Jeff has a similar talk with Trent that he does with Gwen, except instead of Gwen's focus being her talking about not being popular and, kind of a weirdo girl, Trent's focus would be about how he doesn't understand how Jeff can be happy all the time and wishes he could be more like that, since it was shown in action that he's gone through some stuff of like losing his grandpa and he's obviously just like kind of like a a big emotional guy. He's not really happy like all the time, and obviously it's not mentioned that his grandpa died to Jeff. I mean, maybe it is, but I don't think it would be. But either way, it's just like he's mad at Jeff for always being so happy and not really focusing on things. And Jeff tells Trent that he does feel those things, but he just likes to party more, which Trent doesn't really see the appeal in. He doesn't really give me those like frat boyish party vibes. But Jeff tells him that maybe he should come out and party with him after the show, and Trent thinks about it, says that he'd like that while he pulls Jeff on his back and they continue the challenge. While Cody and Bridget are walking towards the cave, Cody continues talking a lot of praise towards Bridget, saying that it looks clear from here, which annoys Bridget as she asks why he always feels the need to talk all the time. Cody's a bit put off by her aggressive tone, but tells her that the truth is that he feels pretty unnoticeable sometimes, and even confides in her about his parents forgetting his own birthday, which is what he confesses in World Tour, so that was the thing that happened, and I imagine he'd tell her that now, to answer your question. Bridget
gets sad about thinking so poorly about him and says she's sorry that happened. Cody says it's fine, but he just feels like once people get to know him, they kind of just move on and don't really want to be around him anymore. So he talks a lot in hopes that people will notice him more. Bridget tells Cody that people around him notice him plenty, and he might be invisible back home, but he's made a lot of friends here. Cody smiles at her, and she smiles back as they continue moving forward. Trent and Jeff would win this part since Heather and Lashana would be really far behind from fighting for so long, and originally the first duos to get to the cave get scared off by woolly beavers, so Cody and Bridget would get scared off by them, and Jeff ends up throwing the Keitel all the way into the cave from a fair distance, which would, prevent him from interacting with woolly beavers, which allows them to get a point. And the last challenge is team stacking every eliminated contestant's head in the order in which they were eliminated. And originally Lashana is part of the winning duo in this challenge with Duncan, but now that Lashana is partnered with Heather, they bicker way too much. And once they get to Beth, Lashana talks about how she was a nice girl, and Heather says nice and stupid, causing Lashana to drag Heather to Chris to try and get the wimp key since she's tired of Heather's attitude. Jeff and Trent would do decently, but Jeff is terrible at this challenge originally, and I don't really think Trent would know people who got eliminated on the Bass pre-merge since he wasn't there for those votes. So Jeff not knowing knowledge would kind of screw him over. But both Cody and Bridget are both really smart and sociable people that I imagine would remember everybody. And because they are both actually on separate teams, like, Cody was on Gophers, Bridget was on Bass, they would know everything pre-merge and they would know everything post-merge. So they would get this point, which means that every duo each got a point, and it means that all teams break even and nobody gets invincibility come to vote. Because that's what happened originally. Every duo each got a point, so nobody ended up getting invincibility, and so that would still happen. Now, come to vote, it seems obvious that Heather would go, but considering that Heather just worked with Cody, she would see that as an avenue to work with him. And she would talk to him about potentially voting out Jeff to break the power couple, and because Jeff is too likable, he would easily win the vote at the end, as opposed to Heather, which offers no threat in a popularity vote. Because, I kind of explained this in my last video, Island is really weird because in Island, it seems like everyone on the post-merge cast thinks that there's going to be, at the final challenge, it's going to be like a popularity vote to decide who will win. Like among the cast, like everyone post-merge will vote for a winner and then that person will win. So basically Heather's point is that Jeff would win that vote against almost anybody here, but Heather would lose that vote against Cody, so like Cody should keep her around. Cody agrees with her and realizes that the power couple has to be taken care of, and Cody's able to have a one-on-one with Lashana to convince her to vote Jeff, which she stubbornly agrees with, but Cody would realize they only have 3 votes, so it's going to result in a tie with these 3 over here voting together, and they don't know what happens come a tie, so Cody would want to avoid that. But he can't tell Trent to vote for Jeff since they spent all day bonding during the challenge, so Trent wouldn't go along with that. So instead, Cody talks with Trent and tells him to vote for Bridget, saying that she's too likable, and more importantly, is that as long as she stays in the game, Jeff remains a target as half of a power couple. And Trent realizes that Cody is right. Trent struggles at the vote, but trusting Cody and wanting to help Jeff out if they are voting out Bridget like Trent thinks they are, then Jeff would be safer come the rest of the game because he wouldn't be viewed as big of a target. So Trent goes along with Cody's plan, voting out Bridget, resulting in a 3-2-1 vote. Jeff gets eliminated. Trent is angry once he figures out Cody was part of this plan and he lied to his face, and Bridget is also upset about losing Jeff, but Heather tells him to back off Cody because he's just playing the game like the rest of them. Cody is happy to get defended, but once he realizes that he's getting defended by Heather, he starts to question if he did the right thing. I'm not going to talk deeply about all the opinions of everybody on the cast of this challenge, but I will go briefly over certain past eliminated contestants of their opinions on the final 5 that I think are somewhat interesting. Main ones to look at is that Gwen would be really high of Cody, thinking that he's a really great guy and she feels really honored that he tried to protect her name after what happened. Sierra would also be happy that Cody's made it this far and said that when he stayed up and punched Chef, it was really hot, and a lot of people also share the sentiment that him standing up and punching Chef was really cool thing to watch him do. There's no one really in specific with Lashana. Everybody would still just kind of say the same thing, that she's really cool and that they like her standing up to Heather. When it comes to Heather, everybody says the same sort of thing, terrible person. I mean, especially Gwen and Beth would say that she's a terrible person and they're really mad at her. And when it comes to Alejandro, he would say that maybe he should have spent less time protecting her and that maybe he messed up, which would prompt the entire cast to start calling him out for many times where he should have got rid of Heather. Merge episode, even just framing of the Jeff Justin thing, not going along with helping give Tyler. Like, a lot of people just started ganging up on Alejandro, agreeing that he got blinded by love and that what he did was stupid. Trent, I don't know if there's any like super heavy opinions. I think people generally like him, but they also start to see like a bit more of a, emotional side from him, and they're kind of just like, they don't hate him, they like him, but they just aren't like super big on him like they would be for Bridget and Lashana. Speaking of Bridget, obviously everybody would be very high of her. People specific like Katie and Sadie would be really high on Bridget. Jeff would feel bad that he's not there with Bridget anymore. But all that's the sort of general knowledge. None of that actually matters when it comes to this. this, because when it comes to the actual vote by the past contestants, as dumb as it is, it would kind of play out the same as the original, with instead of a really hated person getting voted out, a really likable person would get voted out instead, because Katie and Sadie would both say the name of someone they like, not understanding they were eliminating them from the competition. But instead of Lashana, it would be Bridget. Katie and Sadie both bonded with Bridget very well on the island, so I think they definitely leaned to saying her over Lashana. I also think Bridget is slightly more of like a shocking name than Lashana, because even though Lashana is really cool, she is kind of mean. Not that it's like a big deal, but you know, some people like Lindsay would be a little scared of Lashana. Again, not like terrified or anything, but it's like compare that of like a super incredibly nice person, godly angel of a human, versus somebody who is really nice and is really cool, but is like sometimes scary. Bridget barely beats Lashana out on that, in my opinion. Yeah, Bridget would get eliminated there. Such a fun day. Now this episode, Camp Castaways, is fully inconsequential, but I still decided to briefly go over it. I think Lashana would be the one who was stuck in the confessional in the Camp Bloods, talking to all her friends back home and saying she's really excited about being in the Final Four. There's still some animosity between Trent and Cody, as Trent's mad at Cody for siding with Heather last vote and lying to him about it, and Cody takes over Gren's role saying they should all leave, and I see this because Cody is kind of a doer and he doesn't like waiting around for things and would want to be able to do something. Trent takes over Duncan's role saying they should all stay put and wait for help, and I see this because Trent is rational and calm and would only view leaving as making the situation worse, getting them more loss. And Heather would still say the island is clearly fake and that this is a stupid challenge. Lashana would still eventually find the group, and they would all find the production set, and that would be the end of the episode. I know originally there was a campfire elimination at the end of this episode where they got rid of Mr. Coconut, so it seems like without Mr. Coconut being here, an actual vote-off would occur, but I don't do that here because there aren't enough competitors here. If I got rid of somebody now, like say I got rid of Heather, next challenge we give it to somebody, then we only have two come here, and then this is like the finale. So it's like, that just doesn't really work. And also this challenge, just like, it's not a challenge. It just isn't a challenge. It was literally just like they found fire and then they went to the fire and then the challenge ended. It's basically just like, can you see a button? You press button, okay, we're done. Nobody even got immunity. Like, it's not a challenge. And I know Island isn't really a fair season anyways, but having an elimination without an invincibility challenge is just, it's dumb. And in addition, Chris said at the beginning of the episode that all activities today were canceled because of the rain day, so canceling the challenge and elimination also makes sense to me for that to happen. So yeah, this challenge is mostly inconsequential, didn't really do anything except, you know, Trent and Cody are still mad at each other for that. So, like, that animosity stay in a bit, so yeah, that's all you really need to know. The duos for the next challenge were never explicitly said to be as boys versus girls, it just turned out like that, but I actually think that different duos not based on gender could be more interesting. And the duos for that would be Cody and Heather and Trent and Lashana. I think these duos are more interesting because they could actually work well as teams, which would create more interesting conflict between the two groups, especially since both Trent and Lashana have been worried about Cody turning to the dark side lately because he's starting to be a bit more strategic and not really as kind. So, you know, it also gives a good opportunity for like Heather to, you know, mess with Cody and get him on his side, which would be interesting to watch in production's mind. And now that Trent and Lashana would get the map without Owen there to accidentally hold the map upside down, they would just be heading the right direction and have an early lead. Heather keeps working with Cody, saying that they make a great final two. Cody is hesitant about this, since Trent and Lashana are his friends, but Heather keeps insisting to him that he's a good player and he shouldn't let emotions get in the way of him winning. Trent and Lashana would have the lead like I said, but Cody would see the river, and being the crafty guy he is, he would think to make a raft to ride down the river like Duncan and Owen originally do. This gets them back in the lead as Lashana realizes that Cody really seems to want Heather and himself to win, which means he's against Trent and Lashana. So Lashana wants to play dirty by stealing their stuff. This causes the montage of both teams stealing each other's stuff to still happen. It's kind of difficult to tell which team would come out on top of all the other stuff, since neither team really feels like great thieves like Duncan originally, who was able to get all the supplies because he's a good criminal. It's really close because I think Cody and Heather would come up with better traps since they are both smart, but I also think they are more susceptible to traps since they are both more easily distracted and scared. Because Lashana and Trent are both shown to be very rational minds that are most of the time very calm, but I do think that Cody and Heather have the slight advantage and would come out on top with all the supplies from both teams. And from here, the Sasquatch and Aqua encounter plays out the same with everybody getting scared into a cave. Lashana and Trent admit defeat and just ask that they get to camp with Cody and Heather tonight so they have enough supplies to survive survive and not die. Heather is extremely reluctant to do so, but with Cody there, he'd be able to convince Heather to let them camp with them, but Heather stays extremely guarded of supplies, not wanting to let them have any. Heather would pull Cody aside and tell them that they are leaving first thing in the morning before Lashana and Trent to make sure they still win, and Cody agrees as they go to sleep near the fire. Just as Cody starts to fall asleep, Trent wakes him up, asking about why he's switching to Heather's side as of late. Cody says that he's not on her side, and Trent retorts asking why he's trying to help her win then, because Cody knows that Trent or Lashana would get eliminated if Cody and Heather won the challenge. Cody hates being confronted about this, since this is something he thought about all day, but Trent tells him that if he throws the challenge, then Trent and Lashana will vote off Heather and they can make it to the final three. Cody ponders what Trent is saying, and when morning comes, Heather leaves with Cody before Trent and Lashana. Lashana wakes up late, realizing that they are gone with all the supplies and feels bad, but Trent tells her not to worry as he pulls the map out from under his shirt. Cody and Heather are traveling through the woods together with a compass as Heather gets annoyed seeing the needle shifting constantly. It cuts back to last night where Cody gave Trent the map while also messing with the compass to make it not work. Once Heather asks Cody for the map, Cody reveals that it's with Trent and Lashana and they have as good as one. Heather is shocked, asking what he did, and Cody reveals that they will lose a challenge and Heather is as good as gone tonight. Heather is about to curse out Cody as Chef announces that Trent and Lashana have arrived to the pole and are invincible tonight. Heather screams chasing Cody as the vote comes. But there's one thing to note with this vote, and that is that this vote isn't with the campers. It's Chef who gets to decide who goes from the losing duo. And weirdly enough, this is never mentioned within the episode itself, so the cast would have no way of knowing this until the actual vote, so that wouldn't interfere with like Cody's decision to throw, because he'd still think that they get the vote, because it's never said like during the beginning of the challenge that Chef's like, I will eliminate someone from the losing duo. Nobody knows this. It's just in the original, nobody seems to really care when this is mentioned. I don't know why, it's just the way it is. But Chef is the one deciding who gets eliminated from Cody and Heather. And it's kind of a toss-up, because I do think he doesn't like Heather. But one, I don't think he'd like a final free friendship finale with, Cody, Trent, and Lashana at the end. That's kind of boring to watch. And two, there was a certain episode that comes to mind where Cody punched Chef in the face, and I think Chef hasn't forgotten about that, and he would still be mad at Cody for doing that. So Chef would eliminate Cody as Trent and Lashana give him a goodbye, while Heather blows a raspberry at Cody, saying that he would have stayed if he had listened to her, and it's a real shame because he had a lot of potential that he threw away. Cody glares at her as Trent and Lashana tell him that he did the right thing as he goes off on the boat of losers. This next episode is a really rough challenge to estimate, since there is no way to fully play out everything that is going to happen. The random spins, the random chance, the random dares, and that's not even like mentioning that a fair amount of the dares for some reason have to revolve around Owen, like, eat his toe jam, lick his armpit. Like, all those dares just couldn't even happen now because he's not there. So it's like then I have to estimate for those different dares. So there's just too much chance in this episode to fully play the rounds until a player gets a dare that they wouldn't take. So instead, I genuinely considered which contestant would be the least willing to do disgusting stuff and the dynamics of this final three. Now, I actually think they all match up pretty evenly when it comes to doing disgusting/dangerous stuff. None of them have really been shown to be afraid of doing those things. In fact, Heather actually showed that the most throughout the season, but given her performance and dedication in this episode in particular, I think she proved that she's willing to do those challenges. But considering they're all about even, I think Heather goes here. Since the way the rules are set, players are allowed to give their dare to another person, and I think both Lashana and Trent would be giving their dares to Heather, which means Heather would have to do twice as many dares as the other two by default. Like, for example, Lashana spins the wheel, Lashana gives her dare to Heather, Trent spins the wheel, Trent gives his dare to Heather, and then Heather spins the wheel, and she could give it to Trent or Lashana, and then just has to hope that that one is good enough to get these two. Meanwhile, Heather would have to consistently be taking two, unless she wants to take a couple dares of her own to get freebies, but even then, that means she has to take 3 dares an entire round where Trent and Lashana don't, which means they're not getting weaker. And I'm sure there is some sort of strategy that she could kind of implement, she'd maybe only target one of the competitors, only give her dares to Trent and hope that he'd give up. But it just seems way more likely that Heather would get eliminated here, since she just have to take more dares. So it's more likely that Lashana and Trent get a dare that, is really bad that they give to Heather. And even then, there are some tamer dares in the mix. Cody's dare was putting a tray of ice in your pants, and it's that's not comfortable, but it's doable, and Trent could take that dare just to get a freebie. And then it's that also messes with Heather's plan. So it's I think it's a lot more likely that Heather just gets eliminated here. And since Heather is getting eliminated anyways, and Lindsay's dare is still in the mix, I decided that she would still get eliminated the same way she does with her hair getting cut off, since it's just a good downfall to give a villain, and it closes her elimination and story pretty well. Alright, now we're at the finale. If you haven't watched one of my what ifs before, when I get to the finale part, I kind of drop the whole what if of the situation and I start making just a rewrite since, you know, the elimination order is already decided. And if you only care about the what if on a elimination base order, then what you saw before is the elimination, and now from here I'm just going to be finishing the stories that I've created with these two finalists. Now for each finalist explaining what they would do with the money, I see Trent talking about how he'd use the money to help him create a business working on motorcycles. Like I mentioned earlier, that's his dream, so I imagine he'd want to do that. But I think since he bonded with Jeff and they talked about going to a party after the show, he'd also say that he'd be willing to delegate some money to throw a big party and invite everyone here, and then clarify saying almost everyone here while looking down at Heather and Alejandro. Lashana is a smart girl and would probably say that she'd use her money to help herself get through school and also use the remaining money to help her family out, since she wants to help people with her money and doesn't want to, you know, splurge it on anything like that. And I'm just going to try and talk briefly over why everybody chose the sides they do, since obviously it's really different just by looking at it. Now, Alejandro chose Lashana's side because even though he isn't like a super big fan of her, he's not really a big fan of either of them, and he is more impressed with what Lashana was able to do because he thinks she had a really impressive showing. And also Heather just naturally goes for Trent because she really hates Lashana, and Alejandro doesn't really like her once he figured out that she was the reason he got eliminated, so to kind of spite her, he chose Lashana. Harold, self-explanatory, they got along really well. Cody, also self-explanatory. Beth, also self-explanatory. And Sierra's here because of Cody, so Sierra wants to help Cody. Gwen, actually I'll talk about Gwen a bit later because she's a bit of a confusing case. I chose Tyler for Lashana because even though he wasn't happy with what Lashana like did to him, because obviously she caused his elimination, he understands now that given the context she had, she did a nice thing for Lindsay, which Tyler respects. And also in the special of action leading into World Tour, they were both seen to work together on a show, showing that they had some sort of connection. Jeff, also self-explanatory. Him and Trent bonded really well in Jeff's elimination episode. Bridget naturally just got along really well with Lashana, so she goes over there. It is possible that maybe she'd go over on Trent's side just because Jeff's over here, but I do think that they have like enough independence that they don't have to agree on every single issue, so they're allowed to like root for opposite people, especially since it's not like a big deal. Like both Lashana and Trent are friends, they wouldn't be like super mad if the other person won, so it's not like super heated finale or anything. Izzy's over on Trent's side because she doesn't really like Lashana. In her elimination episode at Up the Creek, her and Lashana were paddling duos, and Lashana got really annoyed at Izzy for throwing the challenge and letting the bats win, and then Izzy even says a line like, "You're so lucky my permit to kill is expired right now," implying she wants to kill Lashana, so I don't think they're on the best of terms. Now Justin, I'll talk about him in a bit actually, because Katie and Sadie are both here, obviously for Lashana, and also because Bridget's here, so they listen to her. And both Katie and Sadie really like Lashana for, you know, being a strong woman who also made it here, and also she's just like a pretty cool girl. And then Justin comes over here by default because he likes Katie and Sadie, so he agrees with their opinions, and he also does like Lashana too, thinking it was pretty cool that she stood up to Heather because, you know, he's obviously not that big a fan of her. Noah's kind of a toss-up since I don't really think he's too high on either of them. I think he definitely likes Lashana for, you know, being against Heather and doing a lot of things to her, but I think in general Noah's also kind of a bit of a strategic guy, and he would like Trent since he kind of played a more strategic game. And also it's weird because in the original of the elimination episode that Noah left, there was a scene at the end where, like, you know, Heather and Gwen both said like Noah wasn't a team player, and then the whole team kind of leaves. But Trent and Justin were two people who didn't leave Noah. They like stayed sitting next to him, and it's not explained why, but I'm assuming that means that on some level they had, like, you know, an okay friendship given Noah's short stay. So I do think Noah kind of likes Trent. Ezekiel, kind of obvious. Woman, man, sexist beliefs. You get it. Owen is here because Trent talked about having a party because of Jeff. So because Trent talked about having a party, Owen would like that and Owen would want to be on this side. And same with Lindsay. She also came once he talked about the party. Duncan, I imagine, would like Lashana's more harsh attitude and think that she's, again, also cool for standing up to Heather. And same thing with Eva. DJ is a bit of a tough card, but I think he likes Trent slightly more just because Trent is shown to be like a really down-to-earth and nice guy. Plus, more of DJ's friends are on this side, like Jeff. DJ would just prefer to be over here. Also the party, so yeah. And then Courtney is kind of like what I mentioned with Noah. I think in general, Courtney would think that Trent played a more strategic game and deserves the win, because near the end there of Cody, he was able to make some big moves. Obviously, he was like part of the move to get rid of Alejandro, which is like the game-changing move. And with Gwen, there's a lot of things with Trent that I don't really want to talk about, because if I do plan on doing a continuation, I'm going to talk about that, you know, in the continuation, but basically, like, she's not too happy of Trent because it's really awkward between them right now. And also, Gwen would just like Lashana's case of saying, like, she wants to help her family, so Gwen thinks that's really, a sweet and noble cause, so she'd want to help that more than a party. When Chris explains the challenge to the finalists, he never explicitly says that it's only a certain number of helpers are allowed to help their finalists, but that seems a little unfair of just, like, having these little mini armies help the finalists. It's like, that seems a bit much. Then it's like, the finalists even really do anything? So because I am kind of rewriting this, I decided to limit both finalists to only 5 helpers. And once I move Gwen back over here, I've already organized all the helpers that I think would help on each side, with the helpers being in the front left: Alejandro, Harold, Beth, Tyler, Gwen, Heather, Cody, Sierra, Justin, Izzy. When it comes to the first part of the race, the finalists have to climb up the flagpoles to retrieve their flags. Lashana would already be struggling doing this, but Heather would have also buttered her pole like she did to Gwen's pole originally, which she buttered it to make it more slippery. Eventually, Alejandro notices the pole looks shiny and rubs his finger across it, realizing that it's buttery. Heather just smirks at him while Alejandro smirks back, taking his shirt off to rub the butter off the pole. This distracts both Heather and Izzy, watching Alejandro shirtless. Heather, obviously, and Izzy showed being attracted to his looks in the first episode of World Tour, so I imagine him with his shirt off, she could still think that, especially since her and Owen aren't dating, so yeah, she'd still think he's attractive. And since they were all helping Trent up his pole, like lifting him up, Heather and Izzy getting distracted almost makes him fall, but Sierra quickly slaps both the girls to get them to refocus, which helps Trent restabilize, and he grabs the pole to continue the race with an early lead. Lashana would still be struggling to get up the pole, but eventually Tyler would come to help her, as they all doubt that he can lift her up solo, but Tyler instead bends the metal pole using his incredibly strong fingers that was shown in World Tour, and everyone is stunned as the pole is perfectly bent 90 degrees, allowing Lashana to just go grab the flag that's now at like waist height. The contestants would cross planks with Eggs still being extremely scared, and Heather, still trying to mess up Lashana, would stand across and pull out one of Harold's love letters from her pocket and starts reading it out loud. This makes Lashana weaken the knees as she starts thinking about the love letters, making her nervous that she's gonna fall, but Trent also momentarily stops as he's just confused hearing the letters, since they were implied to be very steamy. Harold hates his beautiful poetry being used against Lashana and being read by the voice of evil, and starts to fight Heather as they both tumble to the ground. This allows both finalists to continue across the boards. Trent, however, would fall behind as he looks towards Gwen, and still notices her not really making eye contact with him, and then Trent starts to get in his head wondering why she didn't want to join his side, and if she's mad at him for what happened. Once Lashana gets across the bridge, she leaves, as do her helpers, and as does Gwen, allowing Trent to refocus, with Cody and Jeff telling him that he can talk to her later after the challenge, but he's got a race to run right now, so he should refocus, allowing Trent to cross the bridge and put his egg down. And as Lashana is running near the end of the finish line, Heather launches herself towards Lashana's legs, allowing her not to run. Lashana tries to move, but Heather starts to tell her that she doesn't get to win and she ruined Heather's plan and she's going to be stuck here as she watches Trent win. But suddenly, Heather's wig catches on fire as Beth is shown from a distance using her glasses to reflect light to burn Heather's wig. Heather panics at her wig catching flame and tries to throw it off to stomp out the flame, and the alternate winning endings are determined here by either Lashana running instantly to finish, or Lashana taking an extra second to make fun of Heather, which allows Trent to quickly run past. In Trent's winning ending, as he passes the finish line, Cody and Jeff hold him up as people start chanting his name. Lashana pulls him in for a hug, saying he earned it, and it better be some party he's throwing. Trent looks over to Gwen, who's still sitting away from everybody and not looking at Trent. Trent goes to sit next to her and talk, but Gwen just quickly congratulates him while walking away. And in Lashana's winning ending, she crosses the finish line and falls to her knees exhausted, while Chris throws her hand up, announcing her as the winner. Trent pulls her up to her feet while congratulating her, saying she earned it, and Harold also comes to congratulate her while saying she fought a valiant battle like a true warrior, which confuses Lashana with his noble talk, but still pulls him into a bear hug, lifting him off the ground as everyone cheers. Alright, there you go. That is What If Alejandro and Sierra Were an Island. I actually think this one turned out a lot better than I thought it would. I definitely really remember starting this thinking that Alejandro and Heather both being an island as villains wasn't really going to work, and it does kind of feel a little rushed at some parts, and the fact that like once Merge came, I kind of had to, set Alejandro a bit to the side, not like in a bad way, like he's obviously still doing villainous things, getting rid of Harold, helping get rid of Tyler, going against Cody, basically blackmailing him, like he's still a bad guy, but it's like I kind of had to take him to the side, and I do think it works out well for future seasons for him, which is the main reason why I'm okay with it. I also think it was fun to try and utilize some characters I don't usually work with, certain two people who actually ignore me in the original a ton, Katie and Sadie. I think it was fun to have them there and then just kind of, add them to the plot, because they both seem like characters that Alejandro would want to utilize for being dumb. So it's like, well, if they're going to be in the plot anyway, I kind of wanted to do something interesting, and I think it was fun. And I also think Alejandro was fun to write having a longer stay, because I felt like I was actually able to make him a bit more of a human. In World Tour, he's kind of really glamorized as like a mastermind with no feelings at all. It's not really till like the last episode where he talks about like feelings of inadequacy of Jose and having feelings for Heather that any of that comes out. But I had like little tiny plots of him getting messed up with things and struggling, because he's kind of a perfectionist, so I wanted to like mess with him, not exactly getting everything to work all the time, and then him struggling with that, which I think is like a nice way to give him a weakness of being a perfectionist all the time, as opposed to like his only weakness in the original is just him not being good at eating foods, which is such a specific thing to be bad at. But I think now it's like he feels a bit more dynamic and actually feels like a villain that can be defeated but still is extremely powerful. I'm also going to try and keep this brief. I didn't want to make a big community post or a big deal about it, but truly thank you all for the support I've been getting lately. Breaking 1,000 subscribers is really special to me, and I didn't really think I was going to get to that number. But watching it break that really started to tell me that this is actually starting to become, a community that enjoys what I'm doing, as opposed to just like, some people online liking what I do. It actually kind of feels like I have a community that is excited for what I do, and that's always a good feeling. So yeah, thank you for that, and I hope you stick around for more videos, and I hope if you stayed this long that you enjoyed this video. And I'm sorry for uploading again in the middle of the night. I don't want you to sleep. When you chose to subscribe to this channel, you chose no sleep.